I have a very exciting podcast guest today. His name is Dr. Michael Breus. He's a best-selling author. He's also known as America's Sleep Doctor. He has appeared in over 100 media appearances in the last few years, including CBS, TED Talk, Google Talk, and Mind Valley, and you name it. Since the publishing of his 2016 book, The Power of When, he has completely revolutionized the way we think about sleep and how we understand sleep. So Dr. Breus, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You've been working in the field of sleep research and also clinical side. You've been seeing clients and patients with sleep disorders for over a decade. And I want to know, how did it all get started?
So interestingly enough, it hasn't only been a decade, it's been multiple decades. So I've been actively practicing sleep specialist now for 24 years, I think it is. I had no interest in going into sleep when I started, to be clear. So I was getting a PhD in clinical psychology, and I was specializing in exercise and sport psychology. So I was interested in working with athletes and teaching them to throw harder and run faster and get the mental game and all of that kind of cool stuff. And the internship, the residency program that I was most interested in, I couldn't get into. It was only for people who went to Harvard and Princeton and Yale. I went to University of Georgia, top 20 program for clinical psychology, but it wasn't Harvard. And these guys only wanted them. However, they had a sleep track at this one internship. And I had worked my way through graduate school in the electrophysiology department. So I'm the guy that, like, let's put it to you this way. If you have a child who likes to take apart telephones back in the day and put them back together and they'd still work, I was your kid, and so I'm that kind of mechanical curiosity kind of kid. And I worked with these machines all throughout graduate school. And then it turned out that they were the exact same machines that were used in the sleep department. So what I decided to do is I said, I'm going to sell myself as a sleep resident and claim that I want to do that. But as soon as I get there, I'm going to transfer over to the sports psychology department, because just because you tell me I can't be in your program does not mean I'm not going to be in your program. It just means I'm going to find a different way to get into your program. And so I applied, and I was awarded the sleep track, and I got there, and they said, you got to do that first. You can't transfer immediately. And it was my very first rotation. And by the third day, I absolutely fell in love with clinical sleep medicine. And I knew that was exactly where I was going to be. I have a unique position. I help people like that. It's unbelievable. There's people, here's the bottom line. You change your sleep, you change your life. And when you can identify as a physician, if you can walk into a room and identify obstructive sleep apnea symptomatology, narcolepsy symptomatology, restless legs, periodic limb movements, insomnia, all of those things, it's like you're a miracle worker all of a sudden. It's unbelievable. It's so fascinating to me. And people are in such desperation surrounding their sleep, especially now during COVID and lockdown and quarantine and like that. But even before, honestly, when people would find out that I was a sleep specialist, like my wife would roll her eyes and walk to the bar if we were at a cocktail party, because she knew what was going to happen. I was just going to get pummeled, with question after question after question, because so many people have never met a sleep specialist, and they don't even know, in many cases, that there are such things as sleep doctors.
Yeah.
For a long time, people used to ask me if I was an anesthesiologist, and I was like, no, not that kind of sleep, different kind of sleep. So, it's been a very interesting field, and it's been something that I've really enjoyed. I kind of cut my teeth hard on clinical sleep medicine in Georgia, which is where I'm from. I worked at a pulmonary practice for 8 years. Where 30 patients a day, 15 sleep studies a night, the normal kind of grind through medicine that pulmonary gets into and usually has to do. And I learned a ton. I really saw 100% sleep cases, and I saw every variation you could imagine of just about everything that there was. And then, to be honest with you, I got a little bored with the medicine, because quite frankly, you just see the same thing over and over. And when you're working in a pulmonary practice, at least my pulmonary practice, it was a tremendous amount of patients that were morbidly obese, chain smokers, diabetic, really kind of not taking good care of themselves, and sort of ending up in this sort of unfortunate, situation of sleep apnea and obesity and diabetes. And it just kind of, then refractory hypertension hits, and then it's just a mess, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, gosh, I'm really only helping like one person at a time. And don't get me wrong, I enjoy helping people. It's really the foundation of what I like to do. But I wanted to get bigger at it, and I wanted to do it in a bigger scale. And so I started my own consulting company where I was teaching doctors how to open up and effectively run sleep laboratories, because I had 4 of them for this group that I was working with. We started with 1, and then I built it to 4. So now all of a sudden I knew a little bit about business, and I ended up getting a job across the country with a sleep laboratory company. So we were the 5th largest sleep laboratory company in the country. Originally, it was called Phoenix Sleep. It then changed the name to Rite Sleep Health. So I had 240 beds in 40 states. I'm sorry, in 14 states that I was responsible for. So I was the liaison between the clinics and the medical, and the board. So I was the only person with any medical knowledge in between the two. And we started working on trying to figure out the most efficient ways to diagnose people with sleep apnea, narcolepsy, things like that. It was a great position. I really enjoyed what I did. Worked there for a little while. And then I started writing books. I was very fortunate. One of my close friends turned out to be one of the vice presidents of this company called WebMD. This was when WebMD wasn't even WebMD. It was called Medscape back in the day. He was like, hey, Michael, why don't you come, do some stuff for WebMD? We don't have any stuff on sleep. And I was like, so I looked, and they didn't have anything on sleep. So I joined WebMD. I was very fortunate, and I started producing content for them. And so I started answering questions and doing articles, and I started to kind of get a taste for the media. And back then, what was so interesting was WebMD was such a new entity back then that all the journalists and reporters, they would just go straight to WebMD, and they'd be like, okay, who's listed here? Well, let's call that person as an expert. And then they interview them for stories and that nature. And I was the only sleep guy on there. And then Ariana Huffington and I became friendly, and she asked me if I would be willing to write a blog on the Huffington Post. And I was the very first sleep blogger on the Huffington Post. And I did that for 10 years or something crazy like that. And so we started getting involved in media and digital marketing and things like that, just to kind of like get the word out. And I had, over the course of time, I developed a brand. So I own and run a brand called The Sleep Doctor. So what does that mean? So we own all the social properties, the websites, and the mission of the brand is actually quite simple, is we give highly referenced scientific information about sleep in a way, shape, and form that is digestible for the public. So to be clear, I do not dumb down anything. I hate that phrase. What I do is I create bite-sized chunks of complicated information that people can utilize to sleep better. You do not have to have a scientific background to learn from my lectures or from my blogs. The entire goal is that the uneducated public can read and learn and become a sleep expert, because that's the goal, right? I want everybody out there to know as much about their sleep as I do, because then, let's be honest, like sleep is foundational into our health. We can start talking about that for sure, but at the end of the day, everything you do better with a good night's sleep. Literally everything.
Literally everything. Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. With all the media attention going on, one of the things that comes up over and over, and the thing that I found most fascinating when I read your book, The Power of When, is your 4 sleep chronotypes, the way you come up with something entirely different. And for my viewers, the people who are not familiar with your work yet, would you like to tell us what those chronotypes are?
So first of all, thank you. I worked very hard on that. So my 3rd book was called The Power of When, W-H-E-N. And it talks about what we call circadian timing. So in the body, there are 2 distinct systems for sleep. One is called your sleep drive. The other is called your sleep rhythm. Sleep drive has to do with something called adenosine buildup. So when a cell eats a piece of glucose, something comes out the back end. One of those things is this thing called adenosine. Adenosine kind of works its way through your system, gets to a very specific receptor site area in your brain. As adenosine accumulates, you get sleepier and sleepier and sleepier. That's only one part of the sleep system. The entire second part of the sleep system is your circadian rhythmicity, or your circadian rhythms. A little bit like hunger. If you notice, you get hungry around breakfast time, around lunchtime, around dinner time. Same holds true with sleep. At least here in North America, most people tend to get tired and get sleepy somewhere between 10 and 11 o'clock at night. When your drive is high and your rhythm is on point, you sleep. But if either one of these is off, that's when you either get a sleep disorder, apnea, narcolepsy, periodic limb movements, all of the things that can be in there, or you have what I call disordered sleep. Disordered sleep is, I don't have an official sleep disorder. Like I don't have apnea, I don't have narcolepsy. But when I go to sleep, I wake up and I feel like crap, Michael. How do we fix that, right? That's what I specialize in. And that's where we start to learn a lot more about these ideas of chronotypes. So the good news here is, believe it or not, this isn't even my theory. So if you go back to the 70s, there used to be a group of research that looked at something called morningness and eveningness, right? And so when you talk about chronotypes, a lot of people have never heard of the word chronotype, but almost everybody has heard of either being called an early bird or a night owl. So that's what I'm talking about here, except instead of there only being 2 categories, it turns out that there's 4. So my contribution to the literature is I added a 4th category. So back in the 70s, we saw that there were early birds and there were night owls. And then they came up with this idea of what they called a hummingbird, which was people in the middle, right?
Yeah.
We kind of go for about 25, 30 years. And then I show up and I'm like, hold on a second. I know that I've got patients and some of them are early birds and some of them are night owls and some are in the middle, but some of them feel like they also have a genetic form of insomnia. Interestingly, these chronotypes are genetic. If you look at the single nucleotide polymorphisms, or what we call SNPs, in the PER3 genetic space, what you'll discover is there are variations there. And those variations either make you an early bird or in the middle or a night owl, or this 4th category, which is this weird type of insomnia. So number one, these chronotypes aren't things that you pick. These are things that pick you. More specifically, if you've done like 23andMe or Ancestry.com, you can actually even look into some of those genetic reports. I believe that 23andMe has a morningness, eveningness report that you can learn more about. So even if you don't take my quizzes, and by the way, if you want to learn what your chronotype is, it's super easy to do. I created an online quiz. You can go to chronoquiz.com. It's exactly like it sounds, chronoquiz.com. And in literally 2 minutes, you can learn what your chronotype is. Now, let's break this down into these 4 different chronotypes. So early bird, by the way, I changed the names. So I'm not a bird, I'm a mammal, and I wanted to choose mammals. I also chose mammals that actually have the true circadian rhythms that we're talking about. So early birds turn into lions. And number one, lions actually hunt before dawn. So they are the very early risers. So my lions are my early birds, but here are some of the characteristics that we've discovered. And by the way, we've had almost 2 million people take the quiz at this point. So we've got a tremendous amount of data to really work with here. So we know that our lions they usually like to get up around 5:45, 6 o'clock in the morning is no problem for them. They have a tendency to be what I call my COOs. These are the organizational. They're great at running companies. They're great at logistically telling people what to do. They're not great at doing the work itself, by the way, but they're very good at managing people to do things. Most of my lions, they like to make a list every day and they go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to step 4. I mean, it's really kind of interesting, almost militant in their thinking. Yeah. Now, I'll tell you that a lot of people come to me and they're like, Michael, I want to be a lion. I want to wake up at 5:45 and start my day. We call it lion envy, right? People are like, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do, right?
That's a real thing.
It is a real thing for sure. Here's what's fascinating is I know a lot of lions. It's not all it's cracked up to be. So number one, they can't sleep in. It's just not in their nature to do so, number one. And number two, dinner and a movie is kind of out for a lion. Let me explain. So when my wife and I started dating, I would say, what time do you want me to pick you up? And she'd say 8 o'clock. And so we pick her up at 8 and then we get to the restaurant at 8:30, be done with dinner by, 9:45. Maybe we'd catch a late movie, get out at 12, maybe go out for drinks afterwards, get home at 1:30, 2 o'clock. That was a normal occurrence for us because guess what? We're both wolves. We're both night owls, right? We didn't even realize it. And because we would sleep in on Saturdays, we'd sleep in the whole thing, right? But it was perfect because we literally followed each other. But what happens when you don't, right? That's a whole different ball game. And so a lot of the lions want to go to bed early. They don't want to stay up. To get a lion to stay up until 2 o'clock in the morning, you'd have to have something highly motivating. And I'd be shocked if you could even actually do it.
Do you recommend people who are lions date only lions? So this be like a new match?
I think there should, like on Match.com, I think they should ask these questions, right? Like, wouldn't you want to know? Like, if you're on Match.com, think about it like this, and you get to the point where you're actually spending the night with somebody, it's too late to ask, right? Like, what do you say? Like, hey, dude, do you snore? Because I'm really not down with that. Like, what do you do? Right. So I think like all of these things, they're interesting lifestyle questions for sure. Like, do you like it warm? Do you like a firm mattress? There's a lot of different aspects that we kind of have to figure out as a couple. Bears, who are the people in the middle, they seem to be very agreeable people. They're extroverts. They are very gregarious. They're lots of fun. They're the people that say, hey, let me buy you a drink at the bar or come to my house for dinner. These are the people that get the work done. Interestingly, bears make up almost 50%. So 1 in 2 people is a bear. Now, this is interesting, and I'm going to digress for a second and tell you where I think some of this evolved from. So if you go back to hunter and gatherer days, there were 3 types of people that were in a village. There were the hunters. They would leave in the mornings, right? And they would go find the kill and they would bring it back. They were the lions, right? We had the bears. These were the people that woke up and tended the village, made sure that everything did well, got the work done, right? I'm talking about bears. These are the people in the middle. And then you had the night owls, which I call the wolves. And these were the people that would do the security. They were up anyway, right? Might as well, right? And so we see that these, from an evolutionary perspective, these chronotypes serve a purpose. This is not something that, a couple of guys in the 70s said, oh, let's see if we can figure this out. Or, hey, there's a couple of polymorphisms over here. Let's see if they have anything to do with it. This was, I would argue, this is an evolutionary step in our human process to help us actually be able to be successful and things like that. And then the final person is a dolphin. It was very interesting. As an aside note, when you write a book and you're sitting in like a marketing meeting trying to decide like how do you market the book, we had a big discussion about what should the names of each one of the categories be. And I was insistent. I was like, I want animals, and I want animals that actually do the same circadian rhythm. Well, we learned out very quickly that people don't want to be a platypus or a porcupine.
Yeah, no surprise there.
Right. So we had to have aspirational animals. And so a dolphin turned out to be a really interesting one. I use them as a representation of insomnia, is because most people don't know it, but dolphins sleep unihemispherically. So half of their brain is asleep while the other half is awake and looking for predators. And I felt like, that kind of represents people with insomnia. They're just never quite asleep.
Yeah.
And nobody minds being a dolphin, right? Dolphins are super cool animals. So I don't think that's such a terrible thing, right? And so we have lions are early birds, bears are hummingbirds or people in the middle, wolves are night owls, and then dolphins are the insomniacs. And so here's why this whole process gets really, really interesting. So if people go to Chrono Quiz and take the quiz, and you learn what category you are, it's fun and it's interesting. But Michael, what utility does it have? How do I actually use this in my life? Well, I'm going to show you. So let's take an example of intimacy, because this is the number one example that people ask me all the time. They're like, what if I'm a lion and my lover is a wolf? How does that work? So what we do is we start to look for hormonal times where there's consistency between the chronotypes, right? So as an example, when I was discussing my wife and I, we run on the same hormonal schedule because we're both night owls. Our melatonin rises and falls at the same time. Our adrenaline rises and falls. Progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, all the things that you need for successful intimacy follow a very predictable path, and that path is based on your chronotype. So what's so interesting about that is you can actually find times in the day where if you plot out their hormones, you can say, wow, your hormones are at a high point during the day, and a great activity that you could do during that hormonal peak would be intimacy, or go for a run, or there are different times where it's better for focus. There are different times that's better for creativity. There's different times that's better for communication. I mean, what we discovered, we found over 220 studies from around the world where people were looking at different aspects and what happens to people with their chronotypes. I mean, we discovered, like, I'll give you another example. We discovered the perfect time to talk to your teenager.
Wow.
That for a second, right?
Yeah.
So I'll tell you what it is, because I have 2 of them. So I have an 18-year-old and a 17-year-old. And we did this experiment with my daughter. And so I would go in the morning and I would say, hey, Carson, her name's Carson. I say, hey, Carson, what have you got on the plate for today? Have you finished all your homework, stuff like that? right, at about 8 o'clock in the morning, I would basically get grunts from her. I'd be like,
Yeah.
she'd be like, leave me alone. Don't want to talk. Breakfast. It's like, that's about as much as I could get out of her, right?
Yeah.
I walked into her room at 8 o'clock at night because she's a wolf, because all teenagers are wolves. Remember when you were a teenager, what did you want to do? Stay up late and sleep late. That's a genetic thing that pushes them. This is why school start times need to be changed, because these kids, their melatonin is just going in that direction, right? So anyway, I ask her the same questions at night. I'm in there for an hour and a half. An hour and a half. Just to be clear for folks out there, my daughter doesn't want to talk to me for an hour and a half. No teenager wants to hang out with their parents for an hour and a half. But I know that I can have a relationship with my daughter because she's open and she's awake and she's focused. And I know what her timing is based on her circadian rhythmicity, right? The same holds true for intimacy with partners. So let's get back to that question, because that's the one that everybody always wants to know, right? So Michael, what do you do if you're different? So number one, I actually created a matrix in the book. So you can put your chronotype across the x-axis, your partner's chronotype across the y-axis, and I give you different times. But let's just talk about it as a general, because people just want to know. You need 5 hormones to have successful intimacy, right? You need estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, adrenaline, and cortisol all need to be elevated, and you need melatonin to be low, right? That's kind of the general profile. I'll give you one guess about what your hormone profile looks like at 10:30 at night. By the way, 10:30 at night is the time when 74% of people are interested in having sex. Okay.
Yeah, that's when most people have time for having sex.
Exactly. And so what's happened is the profile is exactly the opposite, right? Your melatonin is high, and all 5 of those important hormones for intimacy are low. So that's one hint as to when hormonally you should be considering, becoming intimate. Yeah. The second one is an obvious one. What do most men wake up with in the morning? An erection. Right? If that's not Mother Nature telling you when to use that thing, I don't know what is, right? So when we start to look at hormonal times for things, intimacy in the morning, we've now discovered it's you actually perform better. You have a better mental connection, a better emotional connection with your partner, and you have more successful sex. Like this is rocket science, but not really, right? So like, this is how we need to start thinking about things. And so using this as an example, and using the example that I showed about my daughter and how I now can know when to have conversations with her, it's unbelievable. We figured out the best time of day to have sex, eat a cheeseburger, ask your boss for a raise. I mean, like literally you name the activity, and there's been data. So we put all the data together in the book, and then there's 50 different activities. So you can pick whatever activity you want. Once you know your chronotype, you can pick whatever activity you want and know the perfect time of day to do it.
It just sounds right. It just all makes a lot of sense, because like most people, the moment they hear about the chronotypes, they kind of have a hunch like what kind of chronotype they would be. Intuitively, it all makes sense. But I also do know from your book that you have a lot of solid research, like a lot of original research to back this theory up. So maybe you want to tell me a little bit about the research side, how you came up with all of this.
What we ended up doing was we ended up being able to survey quite several thousand people. So I have a very large email list of people that follow me online, my website, thesleepdoctor.com. And so what we decided to do was we decided to create an online quiz. And what we did was we took all of the different aspects of each one of the chronotypical behaviors, both from the personality side, as well as on the sleep scheduling side, as well as on the hormonal side. And then we opened it up to the public, and we allowed people to be able to do it. So it was more epidemiologic kind of survey data.
Got it.
At first. And then we ended up having a database of approximately 5,000 people who were interested in doing the quiz. So we ran them all through the quiz, and then we ran them all through the known quiz to make, to validate what we were doing. So we did all the validity measures that needed to be done to understand face validity and things of that nature. And then it just kind of exploded, and people just started taking the quiz. We have almost 1,000 people a day who are taking the quiz and trying to understand more about this. And the beautiful part about it is now we're starting to see that these 4 chronotypes are bleeding over into other people's research. I'm starting to see other people use these chronotypical categories to look at different aspects of personality, of sleep, of health, of things like that. So it's kind of exciting to start to see my work kind of come in, and people are now utilizing it and saying, hey, let's take a look at this. So there's been quite a bit of research that's been going on.
Absolutely. So the impact this has on, the society runs on a certain schedule. You're supposed to get your 8 hours between like 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. And then you have all the school schedules and the schedules of organizations. It kind of, everything kind of is based around the standard that 9 to 5, this is the peak performance hour. So, but your theory and your research kind of throws away all this. And do you see in the coming years, like people becoming more aware of these implications and this changing the structure of how, things basically run?
So when I first came out with my book and my theory, some very progressive people started doing that with their business right away. If you're familiar, there's a guy, his name is Dave Asprey, and he has a company called Bulletproof Coffee, and he does all the bulletproof stuff. So Dave and I have been friends for a long time. As soon as that research came out, Dave was like, this is amazing. And he ended up wanting to chronotype his entire company. So we actually went in and we chronotyped his entire company. And then we started to look at meeting schedules, right? Because you don't want to put a wolf, which is a night person, at a 7 a.m. meeting on Monday morning, where all the lions are hanging out, because it's never gonna work, right? Yeah. And so we really started to look at the practical implications of understanding this. And, here's the bottom line, is it's a communication tool, right? It's knowing and understanding when somebody is in a place where they can hear you, or they can do an activity that they can perform well. And so it's kind of a little bit of a cheat guide, to your body, because once you start to understand how your hormones work, it's amazing how much you can say, oh, I'm in my time for focus now, so I'm going to be doing my work that's related to focus. Oh, now I'm in a time where I'm going to be paying less attention, so it's probably better for me to be moving, and I need movement every day, so I'm going to add movement to my day here. And it's actually pretty interesting. Now, of course, there are formal jobs, right? People have to be at work from 9 to 5. Well, to be fair, 9 to 5 works great for a bear, which is about 50% of the population. But for half of the people, it ain't gonna work, right? I mean, if you, I don't like coming in at 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm a wolf. I wanna come in at 11, right? And I wanna work until 7. That's how I like to run my life. And so in some cases, I'm actually able to do that because I have a fairly flexible schedule. I would argue that now with COVID and so many people working from home, this is the perfect time to figure out your chronotype, because you can actually change. If you need to be a lion, be a lion. If you need to be a wolf, be a wolf, right? Because you've got that level of flexibility here that could be very important for you, because nobody's commuting anymore. So that gives us a little bit more time to play with.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to come back to the COVID side of things. But at this point, I'm very interested to ask you one question, because it affects me personally a lot as well. Me being a medical doctor, physician, and I know so many other doctors, nurses, and people who work in the healthcare sector, they just suffer so much from the shift system work, that you go to work when it's evening and then you come out in the morning, and then you do that for a week. And then the next week you're supposed to change the entire thing and get back to a 9 to 5 schedule. So, this really messes up a lot of the things, the internal body clock, the circadian rhythm you're talking about. So do you have any tips for all the, medical folk watching?
So everybody needs to take down this website. It's called timeshifter.com. timeshifter.com. So full disclosure, I'm an investor and I also am a developer in this technology. So we've created an app and an algorithm. We use it for jet lag, but we're now developing it for shift work. So it'd be perfect for physicians, night nurses, the whole the whole hospital staff that's going on. Yeah. What we do is we use a combination of napping, light, caffeine, and melatonin in a very particular order, depending upon if you're going from night to morning or morning to night. And we can actually shift people very quickly, usually within 24 to 48 hours. So what we're starting to do now is take this app and this algorithm, and we're starting to deploy it across things like hospital systems. The FAA is actually now interested in our work, because for pilots, right, we can actually help pilots land on the time that they're supposed to be biologically. It's quite fascinating. These circadian rhythmicity studies are really, really interesting. But what I would say, generally speaking, is there's a few things. So number one, you always want to cycle in the direction that you would naturally be going in. So as an example, you would want to do a day shift and roll it into a night shift. It's not as advantageous to go from night shift to day shift, right? And so you want to go in the direction of your biological clock normally goes. That's number one. Number two, depending upon what's going on, you've got to educate your family because they have no understanding of honestly what's going on with you and how it works. Because for them, they're leading their day life, right? They're hanging out, having fun, watching cartoons, going to school, all the things that your kids do and your spouse does and all that stuff. Meanwhile, you're awake all night long. You're trying to sleep during the day in that room in the back of the house that you've created as a cave, right? So understanding how all of that works can be very, very important. I will also tell you one other tip that I think is very interesting. So, historically, we used to tell people when you're driving home from your night shift, right, and the sun is rising, we used to tell people all the time, wear the blue light blocking glasses or wear sunglasses because you don't want to get sunlight in your eyes because then it would turn off the melatonin faucet in your brain. This is a terrible idea. You're driving. We don't need people driving and not being able to see, right? That just doesn't sound like a good idea. When you get home, that's when you would put on blue light blocking glasses to block out the blue light. So you would want to drive home. And once you're stable, that's when you would start the protocols of blue light blocking glasses so that you're not getting, anything else. You would have already eliminated caffeine probably several hours beforehand. You would want to avoid alcohol. I'm not saying that people want to drink in the mornings, but some people's mornings are other people's evenings, right? And so many people would say after work, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to have a cocktail or a glass of wine. For shift workers, that's really not going to be an advantage for you at all. While I can appreciate that people enjoy alcohol and adult beverages and things like that, having it too close to your bedtime will directly affect the ability for your brain to actually go into stages 3 and 4 sleep, which is that physical restoration. And so this is where the hangover comes from. It's the lack of stage 3, 4 sleep and then the dehydration, right? And so the third thing that's so important for shift workers to understand is hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. I can't say it enough. Number one, your body is going to be using excess water when you're working a shift anyway, because it's not sure why it's on that shift. So it has a tendency to overuse that as a resource. Number two, sleep in and of itself is a dehydrative event. Most people don't even know this, but we lose, with the humidity in our breath, we lose almost a liter of water every single night. So if you're drinking alcohol, which we know is a diuretic and dehydrates you, and then you have a sleep event, which we know dehydrates you, and you wake up, you're going to feel like crap. You're a fucking raisin, right? I mean, there's nothing left. You've got all this, all of the hydration is out of you at that point. And then what do people do? Drink coffee, right? And what is coffee? Another diuretic, right? And so we really need to be educating people, not just on the shift side, but on the regular side. Look, here's the way to think about this. So I've got a 5-step plan. I'm going to throw it out there for you if that's okay. So step number 1 is to wake up at the same time every single day, period, end of story, including the weekends. So if you go to chronoquiz.com and you figure out what your chronotype is, I send you an email back and I tell you what time to go to bed. I tell you what time to wake up. I tell you what time to exercise, what time to eat, all of that, you get it for free, right? So figuring that part out, one wake up time, trust me, if you get nothing else from my talk today, stick to one wake up time. It will change your life. Step number 2 has to do with caffeine. You want to stop caffeine by 2 p.m. Caffeine has a half-life of about 6 to 8 hours, generally speaking. And so if you stop at 2, most people go to bed around 10. That gives you about 8 hours, okay? Now, I know there's somebody out there who's listening to this podcast, and they're like, sleep doctor, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I can have a cup of coffee or an espresso at 5 o'clock with dinner or 6 o'clock with dinner, and I can go right to sleep, all right? So I'm going to tell you why whoever out there is thinking this, you're wrong. All right. Here's the thing. You might be able to fall asleep with that amount of caffeine on board. But if I stuck electrodes on your head, the quality of the sleep that you are getting is crap. Okay. Stop thinking about sleep in terms of minutes. We need to start thinking about sleep in terms of quality. Okay. It's not about hours, minutes. It's about the quality of the sleep that we are getting. And by keeping a consistent wake up time, within your chronotype, your body knows what to do. So it's going to get into deep sleep faster and you're going to get out of sleep quicker. So you're going to become more efficient in your sleeping. To be clear, I go to bed at midnight every single night. I'm a wolf, right? I wake up at 6:13 every single day without an alarm. I'm the sleep doctor and I sleep 6 hours and 13 minutes. How do I do it? Because I'm so consistent with my schedule. My body doesn't even require more sleep than that. That's the secret, right? One schedule. Stop caffeine by 2 p.m. Step number 3 is alcohol. right? People like to drink alcohol. I don't have a problem with it, but the proximity of ingestion to the proximity of lights out, that is the biggest factor that you have to understand.
Okay.
What I tell people is if you're going to have a glass of wine, great, enjoy. One glass of wine, have one glass of water, wait 1 hour. It takes the average human about 1 hour to digest one alcoholic beverage. 2 glasses of wine, 2 glasses of water, 2 hours. Once you pass the second alcoholic beverage, weird stuff happens. Right? I mean, it does, right? Because alcohol affects the body. Once you get enough of it in you, especially for women, it has a tendency to energize them. For men, not only does it energize them, but it makes them more aggressive. I'm going to argue that just about the last thing that you need right now in the middle of quarantine, COVID, and all the stress that we're undergoing is aggression, right? Yeah. You don't need that in the evenings. And by the way, just to skip back to caffeine, we don't need more caffeine either. I would argue that this is one of the most stressful times that any of us have ever experienced in our lives. And it's a different kind of stress, right? It's not like it's LA traffic. Oh, I've got a big presentation. It's like, holy crap, somebody might die that I know. Yeah. And it could be a family member. Like that's a whole different level of stress. Why would you want to add a stimulant to that? Right? Caffeine has no place, right now, right? Because what does it do? It just amps you up. It just makes you more nervous. It makes you more anxious, and then goodbye sleep, right? So step number 3 has to do with alcohol, right? Stop alcohol 3 hours before bed, right? So that way you're able to understand, hey, I've got this time frame. I can do it, all good. Step number 4 is exercise. The biggest thing that people are not doing right now is moving. Remember, sleep is recovery. Right? If you don't do anything to recover from, then guess what? Your body is not going to sleep particularly well. I have a celebrity client who tweeted the other day, they're like, I took 200 steps and it's 2:00. Like by 2:00, I'm like 7,000, 8,000 steps into my day. Right. And what she was saying is nobody's moving. So that's the thing to remember here is movement helps with sleep. So I'm constantly telling people exercise, but if you exercise too close to bedtime, you increase your core body temperature. Remember, sleep follows our core body temperature down. So right around 10:30, our body hits a core body temperature peak, and then it reverses, which is a signal to our brain to release melatonin. And then we start to drop by about 1/4 to 1/2 degree centigrade in our bodies. If we've just exercised, our bodies are too warm to drop. I want you to exercise every day, but just don't do it about 4 hours before bed.
4 hours before bed. Okay.
And then that's step 4, 4 hours. So if you notice, step 1 schedule. Step 2, stop caffeine by 2 p.m. Step 3, stop alcohol by 3. Step 4, exercise daily. Stop 4 hours before bed. Step 5 is I want you to give the sun a high five every morning. How do you do that? You walk outside with 18 ounces of water and you get 15 minutes of sunlight. Remember, you're dehydrated. Sleep is a dehydrative event. Do not drink coffee first thing in the morning. Give yourself 90 minutes, get some water in you, preferably a filtered water that doesn't have a lot of fluoride in it, and be able to get it in your body, okay? Then get the direct sunlight. Why do you need sunlight? When sun hits particular cells in your eye, you have melanopsin cells in your eye. When blue light, which is 460 to 480 nanometer wavelength light hits those cells, they send a signal to your brain to turn off the melatonin faucet in your brain. This is why blue light at night is not so good, but it's great early in the morning. So walk outside, 15 minutes of sunlight, 18 ounces of water. You do these 5 things, you're good to go.
Wow, that's fascinating. I do have a lot of questions for you at this point, but for the interest of time, I'm gonna ask the one which is I'm really curious to. So, all of this research, and you have all this tremendous, career, you're super successful, but, we all know that life is hardly ever without challenges and setbacks. Maybe you want to tell me one of the biggest challenges you've ever faced and what you did to overcome?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. So first of all, thank you for asking that. It's a great question. The most interesting thing to me from a challenging perspective as a physician has always been keeping up with the research. Sleep is such a fascinating field. Literally every single month, there's some unbelievable breakthrough. You got to remember, sleep is such a new field. I mean, the very first sleep clinic was in 1946 in Walla Walla, Washington. If you compare that to Hippocrates, right? Thousands of years of medicine versus, we've been in it for about 70 years. So there's so much new stuff. So one of the biggest challenges that I usually have is trying to keep up with the data and reading and making sure that I'm up on all of those things. That's not a bad challenge to have by any stretch of the imagination. That's sort of a fun challenge that I enjoy. I would say personally, my biggest challenge has been jet lag. And trying to overcome that. And that's why I got invested into Time Shifter. So as you know, I lecture all over the world all the time. And I'm constantly trying to educate physicians and consumers and everybody out there about sleep. And so I'm on airplanes all over the world. And you know what? That's not so easy. And so personally, I found out about the company and I invested in the company called Time Shifter, and I use their algorithm everywhere I go. And so that's been the way that it's actually worked out quite well for me from a challenging sleep perspective, for sure.
Wow, fascinating. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Breus, for being with us today.
It is my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me. If people want to learn more about me or my stuff, you're welcome to wander on over to thesleepdoctor.com. And I've got a podcast now called Sleep Success with Dr. Michael Breus. So if you want to really dig into sleep, I interview some sleep researchers. I've also got some fun celebrities on there. If you're interested in how Paris Hilton sleeps, I actually interviewed her, Montel Williams, but also some of the most interesting people you'd imagine. One of my favorites is we got the astronaut who spent more time in the space station than anybody else, 215 days. And he talks about what is it like to sleep in space. I mean, it was so cool.
Really
so much fun. And then there's another one that everybody should check out. I interviewed a dream therapist, not a dream interpreter, okay? Not a bunch of BS, but a dream therapist. And so what she does is she has people write down the content of their dream, and then they use that content to explore their emotions in therapy. It's really, really interesting work, especially for people that have been traumatized or abused in their beds or in their bedrooms, which happens in a lot of sexual trauma cases. There's a phobia, there's a whole thing that goes on there. And this woman unpacks it all. And I mean, I was so impressed with her. She's a Jungian trained, so she's really, really got it going. So that was on the podcast as well. And then again, of course, if you want to figure out your chronotype, check out chronoquiz.com. And thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. We'll put the links, everything in the descriptions box below. Then have a great day. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye now.